Good morning. So a few years ago, I was blogging and I wrote a blog post about 4 perennial beans that you could grow in cooler climates. And that was a very popular blog post. And since I've learned about one more that I wanted to add to this list, and that's one that I covered previously in a different video, but I wanted to put it all together in one. So if you're looking for perennial beans that you can grow in cooler climates, this is your resource. If I come across more, I will update it and add to this. So the first thing to point out is that beans are really helpful because they are nitrogen fixers. And a lot of people who are into permaculture already know this. People who are into gardening already know this. Basically, beans have this symbiotic relationship with bacteria, and the bacteria lives on the roots of the beans. It takes in nitrogen from the atmosphere and trades it with the plant for energy and for food. So the bacteria gives nitrogen to the plant gives food to the bacteria. Happy symbiotic relationship. But the great thing about that is it puts nitrogen into the food chain, which is really important for creatures like us because we need nitrogen to survive. We get that from eating plants. Even though we're breathing nitrogen all the time, we can't actually take that nitrogen and incorporate it in our bodies the way that we can incorporate nitrogen that we consume through plants. So if no bacteria and plants had this symbiotic relationship, we would be out of luck. And this is true of all organisms. All organisms on Earth rely in some way or another on an organism that can bring nitrogen into the food chain and the food web, if you will, and they eat this at some other point in the food web, food chain, whatever you want to call it. So there are a number of plants that can do this, but the ones that are most popular for gardeners are beans because they can be incorporated into either a standard garden or into a perennial kind of food forest situation. So it's important to know which ones are perennial because that way you don't have to maintain them quite as much. You do have to maintain them. You do have to, in some cases, prune them back and harvest them. And if you don't, they will take over because they have that advantage over some of the other plants in your garden that they can fix nitrogen. So they're kind of like they're top dog. So you've got to make sure that you don't let them take over entirely. So the first bean that we're going to talk about is one that you're probably familiar with if you've been into perennial gardening for a while, and this is called the Scarlet runner bean. Now this is not perennial to every climate zone in the United States, and is not perennial any higher than, I think, zone 8. I think zone 8 is the highest, and then zone 7 and above, you're going to have to bring in the roots in the winter time if you want to grow it as a perennial. Otherwise, you can just grow it back from seed again, but it will grow back a whole lot faster from the roots. So it's just something to consider. And this is the first year that I've tried bringing some in, and hopefully we'll plant them out and we'll have an experiment and see how well they do in this coming season versus the seeds that I plant from saved seeds for my Scarlet runner beans. So Scarlet runner beans, the beans themselves are fairly large. I need to go, well, I'll show you a picture here of some Scarlet runner beans. And you can see that they're probably bigger than your thumbnail, and it's the size of a lima bean. They're usually reddish spotted beans and very attractive beans. They also have bright red scarlet flowers, and that's where the name comes from, the Scarlet runner bean. These are probably best eaten as a dry bean that you rehydrate and maybe use in soups, that sort of thing. I've eaten them fresh off the vine, and when they're smaller, they can be cooked, and they're fine, but they're really I feel like they're better utilized in winter cooking. And in the summertime, you've got so many other options in beans. If you have a diverse garden, that these probably won't be your first choice. So I would save them since they grow some nice, really large beans that you could save. And so you can have an abundance of beans in a fairly small space. They also grow very tall. And so if you say let them grow up the side of your house, don't bother harvesting them all season until the end, and then pull them down in the end and just take the dry beans, it's probably a pretty good use of them. One thing to be concerned, to be wary of is you don't want to plant them on the south side of your house. It gets too hot for the scarlet runner beans and they will not set seed. So you won't get any pods, or you'll get very few pods in the midsummer if you have them growing up the side of your house. You have all these beautiful flowers and probably very few beautiful beans. So just be forewarned of that. Otherwise, it's a great thing to have growing on a very tall trellis. They take advantage, they can grow 20 feet. And so they can take advantage of a whole lot of space that you would otherwise just not be using for growing food. So it's really big opportunity for you there, just in terms of planting things that they can provide food in a very small space. So scarlet runner beans, good option. The second bean I'm going to talk about is the groundnut. And I've talked about this before. I think it was February 19th. And it's not a nut at all. It's a legume. It has a vining habit, so it will grow quite tall. And it has beautiful purple flowers. But the part that you eat is the tubers underground. And these can be quite abundant if you let them go, and they're best in their first or second year. After that, they can get a little bit hard and woody, but they taste like a cross between, say, a chestnut and a potato. So they're a little nutty, a little potatoy. Can be used. They're great in soups, and they do sometimes they're a little drier than a potato. So adding a little bit of oil to them when you're cooking them is good. But you can learn more about that if you go and look at my other video. The third is one that is new to this channel, and it is called the wild kidney bean. Now, I thought I was going to love this bean, and it turns out that I just don't find it very useful. The beans themselves just turn out to be very tiny, about the size of lentils. So yes, you can grow this wild kidney bean in your yard, and it will come back year after year. It is perennial in fairly cold climates, but it's just not all that productive. So something to consider if you've got a lot of space, but probably not and if you're looking for the nitrogen fixing capability. But you might be able to find a better alternative. And I'm including this one partly just sort of just to tell you that you'll see these out there as a possible permaculture plant. You would have to harvest a whole lot of these to ever use them as a source of food. And the pods themselves are not really chewable, so you're waiting for these tiny little beans that you're harvesting. A lot of work, very little payoff. The hog peanut. Now that's number 4. Now this is a really interesting plant, but you need to be careful with it. What makes it so interesting is that actually one of the things, many things that make it interesting, but it will grow in full shade to full sun. It's a very adaptable plant in terms of light. You don't need much light for this plant. The second interesting thing, and so it also grows as a ground cover, but it will climb over things. So you can grow it on a trellis. It could be a very useful plant, but the problem, one of the interesting things, but also the problems with it, is that it grows its most edible seeds. It grows 2 types of seeds. It grows seeds in pods, just like you would imagine with a legume, but it also grows underground these tiny little additional seeds. It's another kind of seed. And the ones that grow underground, I have not tasted them, but from what I understand, it's a choice edible. So these are very tasty, but they're hard to harvest, number 1. And number 2, this is a really opportunistic plant. It will grow all over the place, and it's hard to get rid of because it'll grow in sun and shade, and because it also plants itself underground with these seeds that it's putting all over the place. And so it will take over a space in short order and be very difficult to remove. So just be careful of that when you're planting it. Make sure you've got plenty of space, that you don't mind this thing taking over, and it will be a great ground cover for a shady area. So it's a nitrogen fixing ground cover. Those are kind of few and far between. You've got clover, but that's not a cold. Clover does not work in shady spots. So it's a very valuable plant potentially, but also one that you need to be a little cautious of. So the fifth bean that I'm going to talk about is one that I also discussed on February 11th in its own episode. But if you're not aware of it, the Lupini bean, and this is the seed from the lupin flower, can be made edible. It is poisonous as it comes off the plant. So you need to soak it for a long time. So soaking it, like the Lupini beans that you would buy in the store, need to be soaked for 15 to 20 days before they lose the characteristic bitterness, which is the sign of the toxin that is in the lupin. That said, these are very popular in Europe and have become very popular with me. I really love them once you get past that processing, because they just take a long time. So you have to plan ahead. So what you do is you boil them, and then you drain the water, and then you take them and you refill the water. Every day, several times a day, you refill the water for like 17 days or so. And at the end of that time, you should taste them to make sure that they're not bitter anymore. And if they are bitter, you spit them out. If they're not bitter, and give your mouth a while to adjust to the potential for the bitterness, because sometimes it takes a while to kind of creep out. If they're not bitter anymore, then you boil them again with salt, and they make a really nice little appetizer with a little olive oil and maybe some herbs from your garden. And so I've become addicted to these things, but it's become a real process for me to keep them going. So it just kind of made it part of my routine to empty the water out and try and keep some of these cycling. I don't know how much longer I'll keep up with it, but it's been worth it for me. And so I am growing more of these. Now, there are different varieties and there are different sizes. So many lupins are too small to bother with. But the edible ones, and you can buy these in an Italian grocery store, you can buy the seeds online. You're looking for seeds, that are probably at least about this big, like the size of a dime. And they come even larger than that. So that's the size you're looking for. If you're trying to harvest these off of a small lupin plant, it's not really worth your time. But harvesting them, and it is possible that those are not really as edible as the ones that you would buy from seed companies or from the grocery store even. So you want to look for large beans. These will produce beautiful lupin flowers, and you also get just masses of seeds off of these that can be used for food with correct processing. Otherwise, you will poison yourself. So be a little cautious about that. So that's I think that's the most exciting of these beans right now that I have not grown a lot of. I've grown them a couple of times, but never planted enough. This year I am planting lots and lots of these. We're going to see what we can come up with for a perennial lupin crop. And I'm hoping that they will stick around after these, that they'll come back year after year. We shall see. From what I understand, they are perennial from zones 5 to 8. I'm in 6B, so that should be right there, smack dab in the middle of my of the Lupini Bean perennialized zone. So it seems very like a very good option for me. But like I said, I've only planted a couple in the past, and I've never had the size of seeds that I planted this year. So I'm looking forward to that. So we shall see. I'll give you another report this fall, and we can compare notes and see how these came out. So that is my 5 perennial beans for cooler climates. I apologize that the Scarlet Runner bean takes a little more work to make it perennial, but the others are good in most areas of a cooler, like seasonal, temperate United States. So and many of them go all the way into Canada. So definitely take a closer look at these and see how you might be able to fit them into your own perennial gardens. Thank you so much for watching. Love the thumbs up. Really love it if you would subscribe. And take a look at the foodforestgardenclub.org. We're connecting all the time. I just had somebody over here today who is picking up seeds. Looking forward to seeing you there too. In the meantime, get out, enjoy some sunshine, get digging in the garden, and have yourself an awesome day. How about that?